The twin
Your weapons
observation
are no
spires
match
of
for
Capitol
this power.
Tower did
Stay
not
back.
pierce
We
the
won't
sky so
hesitate to
much as
defend
they
our-
accused it.
Your weapons are
New
no match
Columbia
for this
sprawled
power.
below in
Stay back. We
concentric
won't
rings
hesitate
of
to
white
defend it.
marble and steel, a city designed to look eternal. Victoria Catherine Sterling stood on the eastern balcony, 70 floors above the celebration, watching the Bloodline certification gala unfold like a disease. The plaza was packed with 2,000 guests, their formal wear shimmering under the floating light arrays that hung like artificial stars. Above each attendee's head, a holographic projection bloomed, vast twisted ladders of DNA rendered in blue and silver, genetic crests displayed like jewelry. The nobility of the United Purification States had gathered to prove once again that their blood had known no error in 400 years. Victoria hated it with a precision that had taken 18 years to cultivate. She was 24 years old, and she had been trained since birth to disconnect her features from her feelings. Her face was a mask of porcelain indifference, her posture military perfect in the formal dress uniform she wore instead of the gown her father had commissioned. The dark blue jacket sat heavy on her shoulders, platinum buttons catching the light, 4 languages worth of diplomatic pins arranged across her chest like a shield wall. Below her, the crowd moved in careful choreographed patterns, each family taking their turn on the central dais to project their helix into the night air. The high tribunal sat on a raised platform at the plaza's north end, 5 figures in crimson robes whose faces had been smoothed by so many regeneration treatments that they looked more like wax sculptures than living people. Victoria's own genetic display would come last. She was, after all, the flawless vessel, the only daughter of President Richard Sterling, whose lineage traced an unbroken line to the Mayflower colonists. Not a single deviation in 16 generations, not a single mistake. She thought about the word mistake often, usually while looking in mirrors. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwanted. She was 6 years old, kneeling on the marble floor of her father's study. Her knees hurt from the hard surface, but she didn't cry. Queens don't cry. Her father stood above her, holding her favorite toy, a small wooden rabbit that one of the kitchen staff had carved for her birthday. "It's weak," President Sterling had said, his voice carrying the same resonant authority he used in speeches. "Attachment is a flaw, Victoria. If you love small things, you will make small decisions." He'd crushed the rabbit in his hand. The wood splintered with a sound like breaking bones. "Smile," he'd commanded. Little Victoria had cried. She couldn't help it. "I said smile," the president had roared, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "A queen does not weep. A queen smiles while others beg. Smile, or I will punish the servant who carved it." Victoria had forced her lips into a smile. The shape felt wrong on her face, a rictus of obedience. Her heart was breaking, but her face showed nothing but pleasant compliance. The servant, a man whose name she never learned, had been reassigned to the waste reclamation facilities that same night. She'd learned the lesson. Immaculate daughters don't love. Unblemished daughters don't break. Pristine daughters smile while the world burns, because someone has to maintain order while lesser people scream. "Your mother would be pleased with your posture." The voice came from her left, dry as old paper. Victoria didn't turn. She knew it was Senior Counselor Blackwell, the president's chief advisor, a man whose skin had been smoothed by so many treatments that he looked like an unbaked loaf of bread wearing an expensive suit. "My mother would be pleased if I dissolved into pure data and uploaded myself to the National Archives," Victoria replied, her voice soft enough that only Blackwell could hear. "Then I would be immaculate forever." "Purity is the burden we bear for stability," Blackwell said, missing the sarcasm entirely. His eyes tracked the crowd below with the focus of a surveillance drone. "The galaxy outside our borders is chaos. We are the anchor, the last bastion of human genetic integrity." Victoria wanted to tell him that anchors don't float. They sink, dragging everything attached to them down into the dark. Instead, she waved a gloved hand at the crowd, a gesture that was precise, elegant, and entirely hollow. She scanned the lower tiers of the plaza where the off-worlders stood, the envoys and traders who were allowed to witness the grandeur of the United Purification States, but forbidden from touching anything of value. They clustered near the perimeter in their drab, utilitarian grays and browns, a reminder that humanity's colonies had fallen into genetic chaos while Earth's American remnant held the line. That was when she saw him. He was leaning against a pillar of white marble, looking entirely too comfortable for someone surrounded by armed security and genetic supremacists. He wore the gray of the Neutral Trade Guild, a loose-fitting jacket over a simple black shirt, practical boots instead of formal shoes. No genetic crest hologram above his head. Envoys were granted that particular exemption as a courtesy, though Victoria suspected it was more about not having to display the impurity of off-world bloodlines. The man was peeling a piece of local fruit with a small pocket knife, watching the proceedings with the expression of someone watching a very expensive, very boring play. He had dark hair shot through with gray at the temples, a face that looked like it had seen its share of weather, and a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone that no amount of cosmetic treatment had bothered to erase. He looked up as if he felt her gaze dragging across the distance between them. Their eyes met. He did not bow. He did not avert his eyes. He did not show even the slightest indication that he understood he was looking at the most genetically valuable woman in the Western Hemisphere. He winked. Victoria felt a jolt of shock that was almost painful, like touching a live wire. No one winked at the president's daughter. It wasn't just rude. It suggested a familiarity that could not exist between the pristine and the compromised. She stiffened, turning back to the ceremony, but the image of his crooked, unimpressed smile burned in her mind like a solar flare. "Your Grace?" Blackwell's voice held a note of concern. "Are you unwell?" "I'm fine," Victoria said, though her pulse was hammering against her ribs. "The lights are bright tonight." 2 days later, the formal introductions were held in the Hall of Whispers. The chamber was an architectural marvel, designed during the height of the Purification Wars to amplify the voice of the regent while dampening the objections of everyone else. The acoustics were treacherous. A whisper in the wrong place could carry to every corner, while a shout from the supplicant's floor might die before reaching the tribunal's ears. Victoria sat to the right of her father's throne. President Sterling was currently in deep sleep rejuvenation, a quarterly treatment that kept him looking 45 instead of 62. In his absence, the throne sat empty, a stark reminder of authority that didn't need a body to enforce itself. The off-world delegation stood in the center of the marble floor, flanked by two of their senior guild representatives. The man from the plaza stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed but respectful. Victoria had pulled his file the night before. Daniel Graves, age 38, former military. The file was vague about which branch, but the scar and the way he moved suggested special operations. 15 years with the Neutral Trade Guild as a senior translator and cultural liaison. He was good. She had to give him that. He navigated the treacherous currents of high protocol with fluid grace, sidestepping insults and turning demands into compromises. He spoke the formal tongue with a slight rough accent that made the liquid vowels sound grounded, earthy, like he was discussing philosophy over coffee instead of negotiating trade quotas under threat of orbital blockade. High Priest Carrington was currently droning on about the sanctity of genetic barriers, a speech he had given 6 times in the last month. He paused for effect, raising his arms to the vaulted ceiling, waiting for the customary hum of approval from the assembled court officials. The silence stretched a second too long. "I think his battery might have died," Graves whispered to the colleague beside him. The Hall of Whispers was treacherous. The comment, meant to be a private aside, drifted up toward the dais with pristine clarity, carried by the acoustic design that was supposed to protect the powerful from hearing dissent. The court froze. High Priest Carrington lowered his arms slowly, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed violently with his ceremonial robes. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Victoria felt the laughter bubble up in her throat, sudden and violent. It was such a stupid, petty joke, but the sheer absurdity of it in this cathedral of self-importance struck her defenses like a kinetic round. She pressed her lips together, her shoulders shaking with the effort of suppression. She coughed, turning the laugh into a delicate clearing of her throat, but her eyes watered. She looked at Graves. He was biting his lip, studying his boots with intense focus, but she could see the mirth dancing in his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He was just trying not to get executed. For the first time in years, the ice around Victoria's heart cracked just enough to let in something warm. The next morning, Victoria spoke the words to her personal security detail with the flat authority of someone who had never been questioned. "I require the services of the guild translator," she said, keeping her voice emotionless. The excavation team in the Northern Wastes has recovered a diplomatic relic from the First Dynasty. The dialect is obscure. The human seems capable. It was a transparent excuse. The Royal Archive had algorithmic translation systems that could decode obscure dialects in seconds. But Victoria wanted to see the man who had almost made her laugh in the Hall of Whispers, and no one questioned the air when she made requests that sounded official. Graves arrived at her private study an hour later. The room was Victoria's sanctuary, a space she had designed herself when she turned 18 and was granted limited autonomy over her personal quarters. The walls were transparency glass overlooking the suspended gardens, vertical forests of engineered plants that bloomed in colors that didn't exist in nature. Light poured in from three directions, making the room feel like it was floating in sky. Graves bowed low and respectful when he entered, but when he straightened up, that same easy smile was tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Your Grace," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that felt like contraband in this sterile building. "I was told there's an emergency involving a dusty rock." "A diplomatic relic," Victoria corrected, gesturing to the obsidian sphere resting on her desk. It was about the size of a human skull, smooth and dark, reflecting the light like frozen oil. "It's a data cache from the era of unification, not a rock." Graves stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that looked military despite the civilian clothes. He circled the desk slowly, examining the object from multiple angles. Victoria noticed he was looking at her as much as he was looking at the relic. "Of course," he said, his tone absolutely sincere in a way that made it clear he was being anything but. "My apologies to the rock. What do you need me to do?" "Translate it," Victoria said, settling into the chair behind her desk. Manually, the automated systems missed the nuance. Graves looked at her, and she knew that he knew she was lying. The realization sent a thrill of danger down her spine, not fear exactly, but something that made her feel awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Nuance," Graves repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Right, well, I'm a big fan of nuance. Shall we begin?" They spent the next 4 hours working on a translation that should have taken 20 minutes. Graves sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by holographic projections of ancient syntax trees. Victoria paced the length of the room, ostensibly checking references, actually just trying to calm the nervous energy that made her want to move. They argued over verb tenses. They debated the cultural context of surrender versus harmony in the philosophical texts of the First Dynasty. "You have a reckless mouth, envoy," Victoria said after he suggested that the First Dynasty emperor sounded like a petulant child in his later edicts. "And you have a terrifying glare, Your Grace," Graves retorted, not looking up from the hologram he was manipulating with hand gestures. "I feel like I'm being dissected by a precision laser every time I disagree with you." "Your terrifying grace," Victoria mused, testing the sound of it. "I like it. It sounds efficient." "It suits you," Graves said. He deactivated the hologram and looked up at her, the playfulness in his face softening into something more thoughtful. "But I don't think it's the whole story." Victoria stopped pacing. The air in the room felt suddenly thin, like they'd climbed to a higher altitude without moving. "You're here to translate the relic, Graves," she said carefully. "Not the princess." "We're done with the relic," Graves said, tapping the sphere with one finger. "It's a grocery list, literally, a manifest for grain shipments from the agricultural stations to the capital city. Barley, wheat, protein supplements, very thorough accounting." Victoria felt heat bloom in her neck and face. She'd been caught in the lie, and they both knew it. "Oh," she managed. "But," Graves added quickly, standing up in one smooth motion, "it's a very poetic grocery list." The nuance was definitely critical. The cultural implications of grain distribution in post-war reconstruction cannot be overstated. He was saving her pride. He was lying to protect her dignity, returning the courtesy she'd extended by not calling guards when he'd made the battery joke. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time, not at a diplomat or a translator or an off-worlder, at a man who had just chosen kindness when he could have chosen power. "The rumors about humans being brutish and simple are lies, aren't they?" she said quietly. "We have our moments," Graves replied. Over the next 2 weeks, the translation project expanded in scope and absurdity. Victoria found other artifacts, other documents, other increasingly transparent excuses to summon Daniel Graves to her study. The security detail stopped questioning it after the third day. If the heir wanted to spend her afternoons arguing about dead languages with a guild translator, that was well within her privileges. The study became their refuge, a place where the rigid protocols of the court couldn't quite reach. They spoke of everything except the obvious growing tension between them. Graves told her about the worlds he'd visited. Planets made of compressed carbon where the rain fell as diamond dust. Moons where the atmosphere sang in harmonic frequencies that could shatter glass or heal wounds depending on the season. Trade stations built in the ruins of ancient wars, where life was cheap but freedom was abundant. He spoke of the chaotic beauty of a galaxy that wasn't obsessed with genetic purity, where people mixed and bred and loved without checking bloodline charts first, where mistakes were just called living. In return, Victoria showed him the cage. On the 8th day, she took him to the west wing of the palace, a restricted area that few envoys were ever permitted to see. The Museum of Purity Victories was a long hall lined with statues of conquerors and glass cases containing the banners of defeated houses. Each display was a monument to the systematic elimination of genetic deviation. "This is how we became unblemished," Victoria said, her voice echoing in the cold marble hall. She stopped in front of a display case containing shattered genetic crests, holographic projections frozen in crystal, their colors muted in gray. The Purification Wars. My ancestors decided that genetic divergence was the source of all conflict, so they removed the divergence. Graves walked slowly down the line of displays, his usual wit completely absent. He stopped in front of a hologram depicting the burning of a city on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. Flames rendered in historical detail consumed buildings while tiny figures fled in all directions. "They look like people," Graves said softly. "They were," Victoria replied. "They were just messy people, illogical, emotional, too quick to anger, too slow to forgive. My father calls them the rough drafts. He says you have to burn the rough drafts to get to the masterpiece." Graves turned to face her. His eyes were dark, filled with a sadness that surprised her in its depth. "That's not how art works," he said quietly. "And it's definitely not how life works, Victoria." He used her name, not her title, just her name hanging in the air between them like a transgression that could have had him flogged. But Victoria didn't call the guards. She stepped closer to him, close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes, brown with flecks of gold near the iris. "I know," she whispered. "I hate this place. I hate the silence of it. I hate that we celebrate victory and never mourn the cost." Graves looked at the burning city one last time, then bowed his head. It wasn't the formal bow of a diplomat to royalty. It was a gesture of genuine mourning, a moment of respect for people who had been dead for over a century. Her own people never showed such respect. They only celebrated the purity that resulted from the purge. In that moment, Graves became something different to her. He became the only authentic thing in a world of holograms. The shift from intellectual curiosity to something far more dangerous happened in the Arboretum. It was late evening, nearly midnight. The artificial sky above New Columbia had dimmed to a deep indigo, scattered with projected stars that mimicked the constellations visible from pre-war Earth. Victoria and Graves were walking through a corridor of bioluminescent vines, plants that had been genetically engineered to glow with a soft, pulsing rhythm that mimicked the beating of a heart. They were arguing about music. Graves preferred the chaotic, rhythmic pounding of percussion ensembles from the outer colonies. Music that had no mathematical structure, just raw, emotional beats layered on top of each other until the sound became almost physical. Victoria had only ever known the precise mathematical harmonies of approved opera, where every note was calculated for maximum aesthetic efficiency. "You can't dance to math," Graves insisted, his hands moving as he spoke, conducting invisible orchestras in the air. "Music has to be felt in your chest. It has to be a little bit out of control, a little dangerous. That's what makes it alive." "Control's the point," Victoria countered, though her heart was beating a rhythm that was decidedly unmathematical. "If you lose control, you make mistakes. Mistakes have consequences." "Mistakes are how you learn," Graves said. He stopped walking and turned to face her. The corridor was narrow here, the glowing vines pressing in close from both sides, casting shifting shadows across his face. The bioluminescent light painted him in shades of amber and green. If you never miss a step, you never learn how to recover when life trips you. And life always trips you, Victoria. The question is whether you know how to get back up. He was standing too close. The distance between them was less than a breath. Victoria could smell the scent of him, soap and old paper and something warm and biological that made her knees feel weak in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. She looked up at him. Her composure was fracturing like ice under pressure. She wanted to reach out and touch the rough stubble on his jaw. She wanted to know if his skin felt as warm as it looked. The desire was a physical ache, a hunger she had never been allowed to acknowledge. "I'm not allowed to make mistakes, Graves," she said, and her voice trembled despite her best efforts. "I'm the heir. I'm the standard against which all others are measured." "You're lonely," Graves said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a gentle observation, spoken with the same care someone might use when pointing out that another person was bleeding and didn't know it. "I see it in the way you hold yourself. You're tired of being worshipped from a distance. You're tired of everyone looking at the genetic crest above your head and never seeing the woman beneath it." "Yes," Victoria confessed, the words slipping out before she could catch it. "I'm tired of being pristine. I'm tired of being alone inside my own skin." Graves raised his hand. For a second, one eternal breathless second, she thought he was going to touch her face. Her breath hitched. Every nerve in her body screamed for that contact, that proof that she existed as something more than a genetic data point. His fingers hovered inches from her cheek, creating a magnetic tension that made the air between them crackle. "I see you," he whispered. "You're terrifying and brilliant and set, and I see all of it." Victoria leaned into his hand, closing the gap. The sound of rustling fabric shattered the moment and like a gunshot. They sprang apart. At the end of the corridor, a palace attendant stood frozen, a junior scribe in gray robes, eyes wide with the shock of witnessing something forbidden. The scribe bowed hastily, turned, and scurried away, disappearing around the bend. "That's a problem," Graves said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register that Victoria had never heard from him before. "Rumors travel faster than light in this palace," Victoria said, smoothing her uniform with shaking hands. She could feel her heart trying to break through her ribs. "We need to be careful." "I should go," Graves said, taking a deliberate step backward, putting proper distance between them. "Before I get you in trouble." "Graves," Victoria said, stopping him with just his name. He turned back. "I'm not sorry," she said. He looked at her, and the smile returned. Fainter this time, weighted with something that felt like regret and hope in equal measure. "Neither am I, Your Grace." The grand gala of the Twin Moons arrived 3 days later with all the subtlety of an orbital bombardment. The Great Hall was filled with 2,000 dignitaries, the air thick with designer perfumes and the electromagnetic hum of anti-gravity platters serving delicacies from a dozen worlds. The High Tribunal sat on the raised dais at the north end, a row of judges in crimson robes who watched the festivities with all the enthusiasm of vultures circling a dying animal. Victoria sat in her place of honor, her spine rigid against the throne's back. She wore a gown of woven synthetic fiber that refracted light into rainbows, making her look ethereal and untouchable. But inside her stomach was a knot of anxiety. The rumors had spread. She could feel the eyes on her, could hear the whispers behind the fans and wine glasses. The princess and the primitive, the heir and the human, the unblemished bloodline and the genetic compromise. Graves was there, standing near the back with the other guild representatives. He looked striking in formal dress, a high-collared jacket that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, dark pants with a silver stripe down the seam. He caught her eye across the room and gave a microscopic nod. "Steady." The music stopped. Senior Counselor Blackwell stood up, tapping his staff of office against the marble floor. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "Tonight," Blackwell announced, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics, "we celebrate the purity of our lineage. We honor the sanctity of the blood that binds us as the last true remnant of humanity's potential." A ripple of applause went through the room, polite and measured. "However," Blackwell continued, and Victoria's blood ran cold at the tone shift, "we have received disturbing reports of contamination close to the throne itself." His eyes scanned the crowd with predatory precision before landing on the cluster of off-worlders near the perimeter. In the interest of transparency and the safety of our people, Blackwell said, smiling a smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. The High Tribunal requests that the envoy known as Daniel Graves submit to a courtesy genetic scan. This will confirm his safe lineage and ensure he carries no biological hazards that could threaten Her Grace's well-being. It was a trap. A public humiliation designed to remind everyone in the room that humans from beyond Earth's borders were dirty, dangerous things to be tolerated but never trusted. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Graves. Two security officers stepped forward, flanked by a genetic seer, a woman wearing a neural interface visor that glowed with analytical data streams. She held a handheld scanner that looked like a jagged shard of chrome and malice. "Step forward, envoy," the seer commanded, her voice flat and clinical. Graves stood still. He didn't move. He didn't smile. His face had gone pale, losing all of its usual warmth. "Graves," Victoria whispered, but the sound was lost in the silence of the hall. He hesitated. It was a hesitation that lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. It was the hesitation of a man who knows the gun is loaded and pointed at his head. "I am a citizen of the Neutral Guild," Graves said, his voice steady but tight. "My medical records are on file with the Trade Commission. This is unnecessary." "If you have nothing to hide," Blackwell called out from the dais, his voice dripping with false concern, "then you have nothing to fear. Scan him." The security officers grabbed Graves's arms. He struggled. Just for a moment, a flash of genuine panic in his eyes that Victoria had never seen before. Then he went still, forcing himself to submit with the discipline of someone who had learned that resistance only makes the punishment worse. The seer stepped forward and jammed the scanner against Graves's neck. The machine hummed, a low, inquisitive note that built in frequency. Then it shrieked. The holographic display above the seer's head didn't turn green for safe. It didn't turn red for biological hazard. It exploded into a violet brilliance, projecting a complex, twisting sigil that Victoria had only ever seen in the forbidden history texts stored in the classified archives. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "Impossible," the seer muttered, looking at the data scrolling frantically down her visor's display. Her voice trembled with the magnitude of what she was reading. "Sealed anomaly markers, hybrid-coded genetic sequences. This is not a standard human signature." She looked up at the tribunal, her professional composure cracking. "He carries the crest of the Dusk bloodline. He is of the Forbidden Dynasty." The court exploded into chaos. Nobles screamed. Security officers drew energy lances that crackled with lethal charge. The measured music of the gala was replaced by the roar of betrayal and fear. "Seize him!" Blackwell roared, pointing a trembling finger. "He is an infiltrator, a blood thief who has falsified his identity to penetrate our court." The guards slammed Graves to his knees. He gasped as the impact hit the marble floor, but he didn't fight back. He looked up, his eyes finding Victoria's through the cage, and the expression on his face broke something in her chest. It wasn't fear for himself, it was fear for what this would do to her. Victoria moved before thought could stop her. She launched herself from her throne, the rainbow gown chiming like bells as she ran down the steps of the dais. Her formal shoes weren't made for running, but she didn't slow down. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise with the authority of someone who had been trained from birth to make people obey. "Stop right now!" She threw herself between Graves and the energy lances, spreading her arms wide like she could physically shield him from the violence. The guards skidded to a halt, their weapons wavering. You didn't aim a weapon at the president's daughter, not even when she was defying direct orders. "Victoria, move!" Blackwell shouted, descending the stairs with a speed that seemed wrong for someone his age. "He has lied to us. He has polluted the royal presence with false blood. This is an act of biological warfare. He is a diplomat under my protection." Victoria shouted back, her voice ringing with a fury she didn't know she possessed. She could feel tears starting to form, could feel her immaculate mask cracking apart. "I order a delay. We will verify this through proper protocol before you touch him again." "There is nothing to verify," Blackwell spat, gesturing to the violet hologram that still hovered above Graves's head, damning him with its beautiful forbidden light. "The machine does not lie. He falsified his identity to infiltrate the court. By the blood law of the founding charter, this is an act of biological terrorism. The 5 members of the High Tribunal had risen to their feet. They spoke in unison, their voices merging into a chorus of judgment that filled the hall like the voice of an angry god. The sentence is mandatory, they intoned. He must be executed at the next twin moonrise. No, Victoria screamed, but the word was lost in the roar of the crowd's approval. Take him, Blackwell ordered. The guards surged forward, maneuvering around Victoria. They hauled Graves to his feet, his arms twisted painfully behind his back. Victoria grabbed at his sleeve, her fingers digging into the formal jacket fabric. Graves, tell them, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Tell them it's a mistake. Graves looked at her. His face was already bruising where a guard had struck him, and his hair had fallen into his eyes. He looked devastated, but not because he was going to die. He looked devastated because of the expression on her face, the raw pain of someone watching their world collapse. I can't, he whispered, his voice rough with regret. Why, Satan? She demanded, tears spilling over, ruining the composure she had maintained for 24 years. Why did you lie to me? Graves leaned in, ignoring the guards pulling him away, and whispered the words that would haunt Victoria for the rest of her life. Because the truth gets people killed, Victoria, and I wanted to live long enough to meet you. The guards yanked him away. They dragged him through the screaming crowd, out of the great hall, leaving a trail of scuffed boot prints and shattered silence. Victoria stood alone in the center of the ballroom. The violet hologram of his true bloodline slowly faded, leaving nothing but the harsh white glare of the overhead lights and the judgment of 2,000 people who had just watched their pristine princess break protocol to defend genetic contamination. She looked up at the dais. Blackwell was already signing the execution proclamation on a floating data tablet, his stylus moving with bureaucratic efficiency. The twin moons would rise in 14 hours. That was all the time she had. Victoria stood there shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The purity of her world was gone. The safety of her cage was shattered. All that was left was a cold, hard realization that love was no longer a sanctuary. It was a countdown. The Royal Observatory at the summit of Capitol Tower was not designed for prisoners. It was a place for mapping star charts and calculating the drift of distant galaxies. A cathedral of silence where scientists pondered the insignificance of everything that was not the United Purification States. But tonight it was a high-altitude cell. The door was sealed with a kinetic barrier that hummed with barely contained violence. The air inside tasted of ozone and recycled fear. Victoria overrode the lock with her genetic signature, the mechanism hissing like a dying snake as the heavy blast door slid open. Graves was standing by the transparency wall, looking out at the sprawling, light-drenched Capitol that wanted him dead. He didn't turn when she entered. He looked smaller without his formal jacket, stripped down to a simple linen tunic that exposed the bruising on his neck, where the guards had pinned him during the arrest. Victoria stood in this doorway, her chest heaving. She had spent the last 4 hours screaming at her father's advisors, threatening the council, and bargaining with a political currency she didn't actually possess. She was exhausted. She was terrified, and she was absolutely furious. Look at me, she commanded. Graves turned slowly. His face was pale, and all traces of the charming, easygoing envoy were gone. In their place was a weary resignation that frightened her more than his lies ever could. I told you not to come here, Victoria, he said, his voice rough. Blackwell will use this against you. He'll say you are compromised, that you can't be trusted to lead. I am compromised, Victoria shouted, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She marched across the room, the heels of her boots striking the floor like hammer blows. She stopped inches from him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides to keep from striking him or grabbing him. She wasn't sure which. I defended you. I put my honor, my title, my safety between you and the tribunal because I thought you were an innocent man caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. I thought you were just a human trying to survive in a world that hates you for accidents of birth. Graves held her gaze, unflinching. I am human, Victoria. Don't play word games with me, she snapped. The scanner didn't malfunction. I saw the readout, the dusk bloodline crest. That's not just some forbidden dynasty from the history books. That's a genetic key, a biological signature required to access the sealed archives of ancient crown technology. You're not a translator, Graves. You're a walking skeleton, key to the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something raw and wounded. You lied about your bloodline. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and absolute. Graves closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the accusation. When he opened them, there was no more deflection, no more wit, just raw, naked honesty. Yes, he said, I did. Why? Victoria demanded, her voice cracking. Was it for power? Were you sent here to steal the throne? Was every smile, every joke, every moment in my study just a way to get close to the security protocols? No. Graves took a step toward her, and for the first time since they'd met, Victoria flinched back. He stopped, looking pained. I didn't come here for the throne. I came here to hide from it. He gestured to the stars visible through the window, the vast darkness beyond Earth's atmosphere. Do you know what happens to people with my genetic markers out there? We're not royalty, Victoria. We're resources. Corporations hunt us to unlock ancient salvage sites. Religious cults hunt us to fulfill prophecies about returning kings. Your father's empire hunts us to ensure we don't exist long enough to challenge the power structure. His voice was steady now, the words coming faster. I falsified my records because I wanted a life where my name wasn't a target painted on my back. I wanted to be boring. I wanted to be nobody. Just another translator working the guild roads, keeping my head down, surviving. Then why did you stay? Victoria asked, tears stinging her eyes. You could have left weeks ago. You could have run before the scan. Why risk everything? I was going to, Graves admitted. He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her trembling hands and then back to her face. I had a shuttle booked the day after we met. I was going to disappear into the outer colonies and never look back. He paused. And then you laughed at my joke in the Hall of Whispers. Victoria stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. I stayed because of you, Graves said softly. I've spent my whole life surviving, Victoria. That's all I do. Run, hide, survive another day. But when I was with you in that study, arguing about verb tenses and dead languages, I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted to live. I wanted to be near someone who saw the world the way I did, who understood that purity is just another word for death. You have no right, Victoria whispered. You have no right to make this about love when you've built it on lies. It's not a lie that I care for you, Graves said. That's the only true thing I've done since I arrived in this city. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm. Victoria knew she should pull away. She should call the guards. She should let the law take its course and wash her hands of this genetic criminal who had deceived the court. But her body betrayed her. The anger that had been fueling her was dissolving into something hot and shaking and dangerous. She stepped into his space and grabbed the front of his tunic, intending to shove him away. Instead, she pulled him closer. It was a collision. Victoria buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking as she fought against the tears. She hit him with one fist, a gesture of frustration more than violence. I hate you, she sobbed into his shirt. I hate you for doing this to me. I know, Graves whispered into her hair. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, anchoring her as she shook. I know. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. The distance between them was non-existent now. She could see the exact pattern of the scar on his face, the gold flecks in his eyes, the exhaustion written in every line of his expression. The desire to kiss him was overwhelming, a physical ache that warred with her fury. You want me to be your royal shield? She accused, her voice low and venomous. You think because I'm the president's daughter, I can snap my fingers and save you? No, Graves said, his grip on her tightening. I don't want a shield, Victoria. I want you to walk away. If you help me, they will destroy you. I refuse to be your beautiful mistake. It's too late for that, she said. You're already a mistake. The question is whether I let you become a tragedy. The air in the room was electric, thick with the undeniable pull of two people standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. Victoria leaned in, her lips parting. Probability of doomed romance, 93%, a metallic, cheerful voice announced from the doorway. Delightful! Victoria jumped, shoving Graves back. A small spherical drone hovered in the entrance. its single blue optical sensor blinking rapidly. Cipher 7, her personal household AI, a unit programmed with what the engineers called a whimsical personality matrix and what Victoria called insufferable. Cipher, Victoria hissed, wiping her eyes. I disabled your tracking protocols. You disabled my primary tracking protocol, the AI corrected, drifting into the room and bobbing around Graves's head like a curious insect. I have 7 backup systems. I'm very clingy. Also, Senior Counselor Blackwell is currently screaming at a potted plant in the hallway 3 floors down, which suggests we have approximately 40 minutes before he remembers he hates you and sends a squad to check this room. Graves looked at the drone, then at Victoria. A small, ragged laugh escaped him. Your toaster is sarcastic. He's a multi-function logic engine, Victoria said, straightening her uniform and pulling the armor of her composure back into place. And he's right. We don't have time for this. She looked at Graves and the softness was gone, replaced by cold, sharp determination. I'm not going to let them kill you, she said. Victoria, Graves started. Quiet, she commanded. I'm done being the pristine princess. If they want to treat me like a traitor for saving you, then I'll earn the title. The plan was not flawless. It was messy, desperate, and relied far too heavily on chaos rather than precision. But it was all they had. Victoria returned to her quarters, pacing the length of her silk carpet while Cipher 7 projected schematics of the palace security grid onto the wall. The AI had hacked into the prisoner transfer schedule with disturbing ease. We can't extract him from the observatory, Victoria said, chewing on her thumbnail, a habit she hadn't indulged since she was 6. The air defense systems are too tight. If we try to fly a shuttle from the summit, we'll be vaporized before we clear the spire. Agreed, Cipher chirped. Vaporization is bad for the complexion. However, the prisoner transfer is scheduled for 0400 hours. They're moving him to the execution block in the lower city via the maglev tube through the maintenance sector. The transport route, Victoria realized. They have to take the automated tunnel. Minimal guards, Vemos. Maximum darkness, Cipher noted. I can loop the camera feeds for exactly 3 minutes before the system realizes I'm lying to it and sounds every alarm in the building. 3 minutes, Victoria whispered. That's not enough time. It's plenty of time for a dramatic rescue, Cipher said, or a dramatic death. Either way, the ratings will be spectacular. Victoria ignored the AI's commentary and pulled up a detailed map of the lower levels on her personal tablet. She began forging a digital decree using an old authorization code from her mother's archive files. It was crude work, but it would be enough to confuse a low-level security checkpoint for the few seconds she needed. She stripped off her formal uniform and pulled on a flight suit, something she'd worn only during mandatory pilot training simulations that she'd barely passed. Over that, she threw a heavy cloak taken from the wardrobe of the Silent Sisters, the religious order that ministered to the condemned. At 3:45 in the morning, Victoria stood outside the holding cell in the transport bay, her hood pulled low. The guards at the door were bored and tired from the late shift. They saw the gray robes of a Silent Sister and waved her through without even checking her face. She approached the hard light cage where Graves sat on a bench, his hands bound with magnetic restraints. The energy field between them hummed with barely contained violence. Graves looked up. He didn't recognize her at first, but then she tilted her head just enough for him to see her eyes beneath the hood. He stood and walked to the edge of the barrier. Sister, he said, playing along though his voice was thick with concern. I wasn't expecting spiritual counsel. The spirits restless tonight, Victoria said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached into her sleeve and tapped a sequence on the control interface hidden there, syncing it with the timer Cipher had set. She stepped closer to the energy field, close enough that the electromagnetic charge made the hair on her arms stand up. 0400, she whispered. Be ready. Victoria, Graves said, leaning as close to the barrier as he dared. You're terrified. I can see it in your eyes. Why are you doing this? Because I'm tired of deception, she said. I want honesty, even if it destroys me. The truth is, Graves said, his voice dropping to something that sounded like a prayer, you're going to ruin your life for me, and I don't deserve it. Then make it worth it, she said fiercely. She pressed her palm toward the barrier, as close as she could get without touching the lethal energy. Don't let this be for nothing. Graves mirrored the gesture, his hand on the opposite side of the humming wall. It was the closest they'd ever been, and yet they couldn't touch. It was an intimacy that burned. "Victoria," he breathed. "Graves," she replied, and it sounded like an apology and a vow in equal measure. She turned and walked away before her courage could break. The transfer began exactly on schedule. A squad of 6 security officers flanked Graves as they marched him down the long industrial corridor toward the maglev station. The lights were dim here, flickering with the uneven power distribution of the lower maintenance levels. Victoria was waiting in the shadows of a ventilation alcove, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. In her hand, she held a pulse vine seed, a piece of aggressive bioweaponry she'd stolen from the Arboretum's restricted genetic collection. As the squad passed her position, she stepped out and threw the seed with all the strength her military training had given her. It struck the floor in the center of the formation and exploded instantly. Thick, writhing vines of rapid growth polymer erupted from the impact point, lashing out like angry tentacles. They wrapped around the guards' arms and legs, binding their weapons to their bodies, clogging the barrels of their rifles. "Ambush!" one guard screamed, struggling against the green chokehold. Victoria sprinted from the shadows. She held a stun baton she'd taken from the armory, a weapon she barely knew how to use, but she knew where to hit. She swung the baton at the nearest guard, who was trying to cut himself free, striking him hard on the side of his helmet. The impact sent a shock up her arm, but the guard went down. Graves was already moving. He kicked the legs out from under the guard holding his tether chain, spun around, and used the guard's own combat knife to short-circuit the magnetic cuffs binding his wrists. The restraints sparked and fell away. "Run!" Victoria shouted, grabbing his hand. They bolted toward the maintenance tunnels, a labyrinth of pipes and steam vents that ran beneath the palace like a secret circulatory system. Sci-Fi had highlighted the route on Victoria's neural interface display, a glowing path overlaid on her vision. "Left!" the AI shouted in her ear. "Turn left! No more! The other left!" They skidded around a corner, boots slamming on metal grating. Behind them, alarms began to blare, a wailing siren that signaled a royal security breach. "The service hatch is ahead," Graves yelled, taking the lead. His longer stride ate up the distance faster than Victoria could match. They reached the heavy circular hatch. Graves spun the wheel lock, his muscles straining against metal that hadn't moved in years. The mechanism groaned in protest but finally swung open. He stepped through and froze. The tunnel beyond was not empty. It was filled with a grid of red laser tripwires, a lattice of high-explosive sensors that would incinerate anything that broke the beams. And waiting at the far end, behind the deadly web, was a full squad of elite shock troopers in white tactical armor. "Surprise!" a voice boomed over the speaker system. It was Blackwell. "Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate a romantic gesture, Princess?" "It's a trap," Graves said, backing up and pushing Victoria behind him. "They knew we'd come this way." "Of course they knew," Victoria said, her mind racing through the geometry of the situation. "They know I'm predictable. They know I follow the path of least resistance, because I've been trained my whole life to do exactly what's expected." She looked at the walls. They were lined with pressurized steam pipes, ancient infrastructure from when the palace had used thermal systems for heating. "So let's be unpredictable," she said. She raised the stun baton and smashed it into the pressure valve next to her head. A jet of superheated steam exploded into the corridor, filling the entire space with a blinding white fog. The shock troopers shouted in confusion, their laser sights scattering uselessly in the dense mist. "Go back!" Victoria screamed, dragging Graves away from the hatch. "We have to find another way." "Where?" Graves coughed, waving the steam away from his face. "Every exit will be blocked now." "Not every exit," Cypher 7's voice crackled through the chaos. "My sensors detect a dormant power signature in Sector 7. It's off the grid. It's old, very old." "Show me," Victoria commanded. They ran blindly through the steam, doubling back into the depths of the maintenance system. They scrambled down emergency ladders, splashed through drainage canals that smelled of chemical waste, and forced open rusted doors that hadn't moved in decades. They burst into a vast vaulted chamber that smelled of ancient dust and sleeping power. In the center of the space, tangled in the roots of the city's structural foundation, was a ship. It didn't look like the sleek chrome interceptors of the modern fleet. It was all curves and shadows, a black orchid made of obsidian. Its hull pulsed with a faint, rhythmic violet light that suggested a heartbeat more than an engine. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. The obsidian orchid, Graves whispered, staring at it with something like religious awe. I thought it was a myth. The living ship of the First Dynasty. It's not a myth, Sci-Fi said, buzzing out of Victoria's pocket and flying toward the ship like a moth drawn to flame. It's a very grumpy biological interface that's been asleep for 2 centuries. Hello, beautiful. Wake up. The drone landed on the hull. The ship shuddered. The violet lights flared brighter, and a low hum vibrated through the floor plates, through Victoria's bones, through the very air. They're coming, Graves shouted, pointing to the door they'd just come through. The heavy thud of armored boots echoed down the corridor. Get in, Victoria yelled. The ship's access ramp didn't lower so much as it unfurled like a petal opening to the sun. They scrambled up the textured surface and into a cockpit that looked less like a control room and more like the interior of a living heart. There were no buttons, no switches, only depressions in a biogel console that pulsed with organic warmth. I don't know how to fly this, Victoria panicked, staring at the alien controls. It's psyche responsive, Graves said, strapping himself into the co-pilot seat. His military training was showing through now, his movements efficient and practiced. It reacts to intent. You don't steer it, Victoria. You ask it to move. That's ridiculous, she shouted. A laser bolt struck the hull outside, making the entire ship shake. Ask it nicely, Sci-Fi suggested, plugging himself into a data port. I'm currently flirting with a navigation subroutine, and she's playing very hard to get. Victoria placed her hands on the warm, pulsing gel of the console. She closed her eyes. She didn't think about coordinates or navigation vectors. She thought about a way. She thought about the sky. She thought about burning the cage to ash and never looking back. Fly, she thought, screaming it with her mind. Fly or we die here. The obsidian orchid roared. It was a sound that was half engine thrust and half animal scream. The cry of something that had been sleeping and was now very, very angry about being woken. The ship tore free from the roots holding it in place, shattering the roof of the hidden hangar bay. They blasted upward, smashing through layer after layer of the lower city, erupting into the night sky in a shower of debris and pulverized concrete. We're airborne, Graves yelled, checking the sensor readouts that were appearing in holographic displays around the cockpit. Royal interceptors are locking on, 3 of them at 6 o'clock. Victoria grabbed what she hoped were controls, fleshy ridges that felt disturbingly alive under her hands. The ship lurched violently to the left, narrowly missing a communications spire. Soft hands, Victoria, Graves said, his voice calm despite the chaos. His old training was taking over. Feel the drift. Let the ship tell you where she wants to go. I'm trying, she screamed back. The G-forces pressed her into the seat hard enough to make her ribs ache. Missile lock, Sci-Fi announced with disturbing cheerfulness. Probability of death rising significantly. This is very exciting. Drop the aft shields, Graves ordered. Divert all power to the jump drive. If we drop shields, we die, Victoria argued. If we don't jump, we die anyway, Graves countered. Trust me. Victoria looked at him in the chaos of the cockpit, with alarms blaring and the sky full of fire. He looked completely calm, and despite everything, she trusted him more than she trusted herself. Do it, Sci-Fi, she ordered. The shields dropped. The ship shuddered as a laser grazed the hull, scorching a black line across the organic metal. Hyperdrive charging, Sci-Fi reported. The ship says she's hungry. I think that means we're good to go. Punch it, Graves yelled. Victoria pushed her will into the ship with everything she had. Go. Now. Away from here. Away from them. Take us anywhere but this cage. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long streaks of white fire. The city of New Columbia, with its glass towers and its bloodline galas and its genetic purity, vanished in a heartbeat, compressed to a single point of light that disappeared as they punched through into hyperspace. Silence slammed into the cockpit as the chaos of real space fell away. The roar of the engines faded to a steady, rhythmic thrumming. They were safe. For now, Victoria slumped back in her seat, gasping for air. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "We made it," Graves whispered, looking at the swirling vortex of blue and violet light outside the window. "Did we?" Victoria asked. She reached forward and tapped the communication console. The holographic news feed from New Columbia flickered to life, and Victoria's face appeared everywhere. A giant rotating hologram stamped with a red sigil. Traitor. Princess Victoria Sterling wanted for high treason and biological heresy. Reward, 10 million credits. The voice of the High Tribunal droned over her image. She has forsaken her blood. She has stolen a weapon of the state. She is no longer of the dynasty. Victoria watched the broadcast for a long moment. She watched her old life, her titles, her future, all of it dissolving into static and condemnation. She reached out and turned off the feed. The cockpit was quiet now, save for the heartbeat rhythm of the ship. Graves reached across the gap between their seats and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid and authentic. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Victoria looked at the swirling lights of hyperspace, watching the only home she'd ever known shrink into memory. "Don't be," she said, her voice hollow but steady. "I didn't just save you, Graves." She squeezed his hand back, feeling the weight of what she'd done settling onto her shoulders. "I burned it down," she whispered. "I burned it all down, and I'm never going back." She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the president's daughter. She wasn't the unblemished heir. She wasn't a genetic data point or a symbol of purity. She was just Victoria, terrified and free. Before they jumped away completely, one final transmission cut through the static. Her father's face filled the screen, not angry, just coldly disappointed. "You've made your choice, Victoria," President Sterling said, his voice carrying that same resonant authority that had shaped her entire life. "I've made mine." The channel closed. Victoria stared at the empty screen, and for the first time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of his expectations. She felt nothing at all. The Obsidian Orchid was not merely a ship. It was a judgmental companion with control over the architecture. Victoria discovered this 3 days into their exile, somewhere in the drift between the inner colonies and the lawless Rim territories. She was trying to reach the bridge to check their position, but the corridor kept stretching. Every time she took 10 steps forward, the bioluminescent bulkhead seemed to elongate, pushing the door further away like a horizon that refused to be reached. The floor, a textured surface that felt disturbingly like hardened muscle, hummed with a low, stubborn vibration. "This is absurd," Victoria muttered, stopping to glare at the wall. "I'm the captain. Let me through." The ship did not respond. The hallway remained impossibly long. "She knows you're lying," Graves said from behind her. Victoria turned. Graves was leaning against the door frame of the galley, holding a pouch of synthesized protein paste. He looked different now. The bruises on his neck had faded to a dull yellow, and 3 days of stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked less like a diplomat and more like what he actually was, a fugitive with special operations training and nowhere left to run. "I'm not lying," Victoria snapped. "I'm going to check our navigation coordinates." "You're going to check the communication channels," Graves corrected gently. "You want to see if they're still broadcasting the execution order. You're worried about your mother." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The denial died in her throat. The ship groaned, the muscles of the floor contracted, and the corridor shrank instantly, bringing the bridge door within arm's reach. The angry orange lighting shifted to a soothing, approving blue. "See," Graves said, taking a sip of the paste and grimacing at the taste. "She's a giant flying detector of avoidance. She rearranges the internal geometry based on emotional resonance. If you're hiding something from yourself, she hides the room from you." "It's invasive," Victoria grumbled, stepping toward the bridge door. "It's intimate," Graves countered. "It forces honesty. Most people spend their lives walking down hallways that never end because they refuse to admit where they actually want to go." Victoria paused at the threshold and looked back at him. "And you? Does the ship open doors for you?" Graves's smile was tight, shadowed. "Sometimes. Other times, she locks me in the bathroom until I admit I'm terrified we're going to die out here." That night, Victoria went to the sleeping quarters expecting to find the 2 distinct alcoves that had been there when they first boarded. Instead, the walls separating them had dissolved. The biomatter of the ship had reshaped itself, merging the two narrow bunks into a single wide platform in the center of the room. "Cypher!" Victoria shouted at the ceiling. The spherical drone dropped from a ventilation duct, spinning with what could only be described as glee. "Greetings, traitorous princess. How may I assist in your downward spiral?" "Why is there only one bed?" Victoria demanded, pointing at the platform. "The ship has detected a drop in ambient temperature in the life support systems," Cypher explained, his voice aggressively cheerful. "To conserve energy, the Obsidian Orchid has consolidated thermal output zones. It's a survival protocol, Your Grace. Body heat is efficient. Thermodynamics. You cannot argue with physics." "I can argue with a ship that thinks it's a matchmaker," Victoria said, her face heating up. "Restore the partition." "I'm afraid I cannot override the ship's autonomic nervous system," Cypher said. "Besides, my sensors indicate a 93% probability that you'll both sleep better if you're within arm's reach. The cortisol levels in this room are high enough to power a small colony." Graves walked in, a towel draped over his shoulder, clearly fresh from the hygiene station. He stopped, looked at the single bed, looked at Victoria. "Thermodynamics?" he asked. "Apparently," Victoria said stiffly. Graves walked over to the bed, grabbed a pillow and tossed it onto the floor. "I'll sleep on the deck." "Don't be absurd," Victoria said. "The floor is textured biomesh. It breathes. It'll be like sleeping on a tongue." Graves sat down on the floor anyway, leaning back against the wall. "I've slept on worse." Victoria felt something snap inside her. Not anger exactly, but a frustration at the elaborate dance they were doing around the obvious. "Get in the bed, Graves," she said using her command voice. "That's an order." He looked up at her, eyebrows raised. "An order? I thought we were partners now." Victoria felt her composure slip. "We are partners, which means we both need rest. The bed is large enough. We'll stay on our respective sides like civilized people." They lay in the dark, separated by a foot of space that felt like a minefield. The ship began to emit a low, rhythmic thrumming sound, a heat cycle that mimicked the beat of a giant, slow heart. It was impossible not to synchronize breathing with it. Victoria stared at the ceiling, listening to Graves breathe. "We need to talk about the dust crown," she whispered into the darkness. Graves shifted and she could feel the warmth of him radiating across the gap. "It was a system," he said quietly. "Before the First Dynasty, before the purity laws, the history books say the galaxy was in chaos. Warring tribes fighting over resources, species annihilating each other. That's the fabrication they teach." He paused. "The reality is the galaxy was unified. The dust crown was a network of orbital relay stations connecting every inhabited system. Instant travel, shared resources, collaborative governance. It was built by a coalition of species working together." "And the genetic key?" Victoria asked. "The builders knew that power concentrates," Graves said. "They knew that if one species gained control of the network, they'd lock everyone else out. So they coded the activation protocols to require cooperation. To turn on the crown technology, you need a genetic resonance that isn't pure. You need a hybrid, someone who bridges the divide between species, between bloodlines." Victoria turned her head on the pillow, looking at his profile in the dim violet light. "So my ancestors didn't purge the other bloodlines to keep humanity pristine. They did it to break the key," Graves finished. "If everyone is genetically isolated, the crown stays locked. Your father keeps control of the few active relay stations, and no one can ever challenge him by opening the full network. The purity laws aren't about honor, Victoria. They're about maintaining a monopoly on interstellar travel and trade. And you," she said, "you're the key they've been trying to destroy." "I'm a fragment of the key," Graves corrected. "My people, we were the keepers. We hid in the fringe colonies, mixing bloodlines, surviving, keeping the genetic code alive in our veins, hoping that one day the system could be restarted." Victoria felt the weight of it settling on her chest. "That's why they want to kill you. Not because you're impure. Because you're the only one who can free the galaxy from their control." Graves turned to face her. In the darkness, his eyes were pools of shadow. "And now you know why I lied. It's a heavy thing to carry alone." Victoria reached out across the no man's land between them. She found his hand in the dark and laced her fingers with his. "You're not carrying it alone anymore," she said. They didn't move closer, but the distance between them felt suddenly dangerously bridgeable. Touching hands! Cypher's voice boomed from the ceiling, shattering the moment. Physical contact initiated. Probability of romantic complications rising to 98%. Would you like me to play some mood music? I have a playlist titled Doomed Lovers Fleeing a Fascist Regime. Cypher, Victoria said through gritted teeth. Sleep mode. Now. Fine, the AI sulked, but you're ruining the narrative arc. They needed supplies, and more importantly, they needed information that wasn't filtered through government propaganda. Graves set a course for Ganymede, one of Jupiter's moons that had been converted into a massive ore processing station during the colonial expansion. The official UPS designation was Manufacturing Outpost 12. Everyone else called it the flesh market. Ganymede was a moon that smelled of ozone and wet copper. The atmosphere was held in place by failing force fields that gave the sky a sickly yellow tint. The streets were carved directly into the rock, crowded with stalls selling things that shouldn't be sold. Jars of preserved biological samples, vials of adrenaline harvested from combat stimulant addicts, data shards containing stolen memories. Keep your head down, Graves murmured as they pushed through the crowd, and try not to look so expensive. Victoria tugged at the collar of her disguise, a scavenger's rig of patched leather and matte black armor plates that Graves had fabricated using the ship's matter printer. A heavy hood obscured most of her face. I'm not expensive, Victoria whispered back. I'm blending. You're walking like you own the pavement, Graves said. Slouch, scuff your boots. Look like you have nowhere to be and you're angry about it. Victoria tried to slouch. It felt unnatural, like her spine was rebelling against 24 years of military posture training. They were heading for a contact Graves knew from his days working the guild routes, a rebel historian named Sarah Beaumont who operated out of a back room in a noodle shop. Victoria felt exposed. Every time someone glanced at her, she expected recognition. But no one looked at her face. They looked at her gear, assessing its value, calculating whether she was worth robbing. They stopped at a stall to let a patrol of mercenary enforcement drones pass. Graves moved instantly, placing his body between her and the street, his hand resting on the stun blaster at his hip. Victoria looked up at him. Even with his face partially hidden by the blast helmet he wore, she could feel his attention on her like a physical weight, a constant gravity that kept her from floating away in the chaos. She found herself watching him, studying the way he moved, the way he scanned the crowd with trained efficiency. He caught her looking. He tilted his helmet slightly, and she knew he was smiling underneath. Eyes forward, boss, he said over the comm loop in her ear. They reached the central plaza, a chaotic intersection where multiple market corridors converged. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of languages, engine roar, and music from the bars. Suddenly, a voice cut through the din. Victoria. It was soft, impossible, and heartbreaking. Victoria's training screamed trap, but her heart didn't care. She froze, spinning around. Mother, she whispered. Victoria, please. The voice came again, drifting from a shadowed alley between two stalls. I'm hurt. Help me. It was her mother's voice, the exact timbre, the exact cadence she remembered from childhood before the political marriage had turned her mother into a silent ghost in the palace. Victoria took a half step toward the alley before Graves grabbed her wrist. Victoria, wait! His voice cracked through her earpiece, sharp and urgent. She's here, Victoria said, disoriented. She found me. She tried to take another step. The shadows in the alley shifted, and she saw it, a small metallic object hovering there, a whisper drone, a vicious little machine, illegal in 12 systems, designed to sample voice data and synthesize psychological bait for high-value targets. From the rooftops above, 3 figures dropped, sleek, faceless assassins in chromatic suits that blended with the yellow smog. They moved like liquid, monofilament blades extending from their wrists. Trap! Graves roared. He slammed into Victoria, tackling her to the ground just as a blade slashed through the air where her neck had been. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Graves rolled, pulling her beneath him, shielding her body with his. He drew his blaster and fired 3 rapid shots. 2 of the assassins scrambled back, their personal shields flaring blue. Get up! Graves yelled, hauling her to her feet. The whisper drone adjusted its frequency. Victoria, why are you running? I love you. Don't leave me. The voice tore at her. It was psychological torture. Weaponized love designed to paralyze her. Victoria stumbled, her hands covering her ears. Stop it. Graves grabbed her wrist. His grip was bruising, authentic, solid. He yanked her hand away from her ear and forced her to look at his visor. That's not her, he shouted over the screech of the drone. Look at me. I'm genuine. That's a ghost. Focus on my hand, Victoria. Focus on me. The reality of his touch cut through the haze. The pain in her wrist was grounding, pulling her back to the point. She looked at her reflection in his blank visor, scared, wild, but alive. I'm here, she gasped. Move, Graves commanded. They sprinted through the market, knocking over stalls. Graves fired blindly behind them to suppress pursuit. They dove into the labyrinth of lower levels, sliding down a waste chute and landing in a pile of synthetic packing foam behind a neon-lit restaurant. They lay there for a moment, panting, adrenaline crashing through their systems. Victoria stared at the ceiling of the alley, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just fear. It was the crushing realization of how desperate she was to hear that voice, to be wanted by her family. I almost went to it, she whispered. I almost walked right into the blade. Graves pulled his helmet off and tossed it aside. He crawled over to her, his face streaked with grime. He didn't say anything. He just gathered her into his arms and held her. I'm sorry, he said into her hair. I'm so sorry they used that against you. Victoria clung to him. In a galaxy that wanted to dissect her, sell her, or execute her, he was the only one who just wanted to keep her breathing. Sarah Beaumont was a woman who looked like she'd been built from spare parts and sarcasm. Her office in the back of the noodle shop was a chaotic nest of data towers and paper maps. Actual paper, a luxury that most people hadn't seen in decades. She didn't blink when two fugitives fell into her establishment covered in foam packing material and panic. She just locked the door and poured 3 cups of tea that smelled like engine oil. Whisper drones are a nice touch, Sarah said, looking at the security feed she'd sliced into. Your father is spending good money to kill you two. We need information about the genetic blackmail device, Victoria said, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. She'd regained her composure, though her eyes were still red. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Victoria with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. You think your mother is complicit, honey? Sarah asked. Your mother is a hostage in her own home. The High Tribunal holds a genetic anchor device. If she steps out of line, if she tries to override your father's orders, they can trigger a dormant retrovirus in her blood. She isn't silent because she agrees with them. She's silent because she's trying not to dissolve from the inside out. Victoria felt a wave of nausea. They threatened her. They threaten everyone, Sarah said. She turned her gaze to Graves, her eyes narrowing. But you're the interesting one. Graves shifted uncomfortably. I'm just the pilot. You're a fabricator, Sarah said, not unkindly. I ran the scan data from your arrest. I have friends in the palace server rooms who owe me favors. I wanted to see this dust-crowned signature for myself. She tapped a key on her console. A holographic strand of DNA appeared in the air, rotating slowly. It was beautiful. A flawless, symmetrical double helix with glowing nodes of gold at precise intervals. Look at it, Sarah commanded. It's too clean. What do you mean? Graves asked, stepping closer to the display. Evolution is messy, Sarah explained. Natural mutation leaves junk code, little errors, dead ends, accumulated genetic drift. This, she gestured at the immaculate helix. This is architecture. This is mathematics. This is design. She looked at Graves with a mixture of pity and awe. You weren't born, kid. You were engineered. Someone built you to be the key. The room went silent except for the hum of cooling fans in the data towers. Graves stared at the hologram. He backed away slowly, his face draining of color. No, he whispered. My parents, I remember them. We lived on the fringe colonies. I remember learning to walk, learning to read. Implanted memories, Sarah suggested gently. Or maybe they were handlers, guardians appointed to watch over the asset until it was needed. Graves hit the wall. He looked devastated. Everything he believed about himself, his struggle, his survival, his identity as a forbidden human fighting against persecution, was dissolving. He wasn't a survivor. He was a product. "I'm a tool," he choked out. "I'm just a biological lockpick." He turned and walked out of the room, into the small storage bay that Sarah used as a safe house. Victoria stood up. "Give him a minute," Sarah warned. "He doesn't have a minute," Victoria said, "and neither do I." The storage bay was lit by a swarm of lantern moths, bioluminescent insects that Sarah kept in massive glass terrariums. They cast shifting patterns of amber and green light across the crates of contraband supplies. Graves was sitting on a crate, his head in his hands. He didn't look up when Victoria entered. "It makes sense," he said, his voice hollow. "Why I'm good at languages. Why I can adapt to different gravity wells so quickly. Why I survived things that killed everyone around me. I was engineered to survive long enough to get to the crown and unlock it." He laughed bitterly. "I'm not even genuine. I'm a meat puppet for a dead civilization." Victoria crossed the room. She grabbed his hands and pulled them away from his face. "Look at me," she demanded. "What are you looking at?" Graves challenged, his eyes wet with angry tears. "The key? The asset? The thing your ancestors built to serve a purpose?" "I'm looking at the man who stood in front of a laser for me," Victoria said fiercely. "I'm looking at the man who made me laugh in the Hall of Whispers when he knew it could get him killed. Was that programmed? Was the joke part of the code?" "I don't know," Graves shouted. "I do," Victoria shouted back. "You chose mercy, Graves. In the museum, when you mourned the dead, you chose that. When you stopped to help me in the market tonight, when you could have kept running, you chose that. A key doesn't care if I live or die. A machine doesn't hold my hand in the dark because it knows I'm scared." She pulled him up from the crate. The anger in the room was palpable, a volatile mix of grief and adrenaline. "You're genuine," she said, her voice shaking. "You're genuine because I feel you." She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of desperate people trying to prove they existed. Graves froze for a split second, then he broke. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her in so tight it knocked the breath out of her. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was the only air in the universe. Victoria's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. The rage and devotion melted into a heat that threatened to consume them both. They stumbled back against the crates, the lantern moths swirling in agitated patterns around them. For a moment, there was nothing but the taste of him, the rough slide of his hands on her back, the overwhelming reality of his heart beating against hers. Then Graves pulled back. He was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His hands were trembling where they held her waist. "Victoria," he gasped. "Stop. We have to stop." "I don't want to stop," she whispered, her lips swollen, her eyes wide and dark. "We're afraid," Graves said, his voice ragged. "We're running on adrenaline and terror. If we do this now, it's just another way to hide. It's using each other to forget." He stepped back, putting a foot of space between them. He looked wrecked. He looked beautiful. "I want you," he said, and the raw honesty of it hit her harder than the kiss. "I want you so much it hurts. But not like this. Not as a distraction." His voice steadied, became firmer. "When I touch you, I want it to be because we chose it. Full honesty, full consent. No secrets disguised as protection. No biology disguised as destiny. Just us, choosing each other." Victoria stared at him, her chest heaving. She realized he was right. She realized he was protecting her even from himself. "Okay," she whispered. She reached out and took his hand. He squeezed back. "So," she said, her voice steadying, "if you're the key and I'm the air, then we're the only two people in the galaxy who can turn on the lights." "We have to get to the Dust Crown ruins," Graves finished, determination returning to his eyes. "Before your father does." "We're going to expose them," Victoria said. "We're going to use the Crown technology to broadcast the truth to every screen in the Empire. Show them the history they tried to erase." They returned to the Obsidian Orchid an hour later, loaded with supplies and a navigation chart that Sarah had decrypted from classified military archives. As the ship lifted off from Ganymede's surface, Sci-Fi projected the latest news feeds onto the cockpit window. The images were side by side. On the left, the official Imperial broadcast showed a distorted image of Graves, his face twisted into a snarl by photomanipulation. Wanted, blood thief, genetic abomination, extreme caution. On the right, a grainy, unauthorized feed from a rebel station showed Victoria in her street armor, her face mostly hidden but her stance unmistakable. The first honest heir. She left the throne to find truth. Well, Graves said, watching the feeds as they punched through the atmosphere and engaged the hyperdrive, they gave us cool nicknames. Victoria watched the stars streak into lines of light. Let's go earn them, she said. The journey to the Dusk Crown ruins took them through regions of space that most navigation charts listed as inadvisable. Dead star systems, where gravity had been twisted into impossible knots by ancient weapons. Asteroid fields that moved in patterns that suggested intelligence more than physics. The obsidian orchid moved through this celestial graveyard with predator grace. But inside the hull, the ship continued its campaign of enforced honesty. Victoria stood before the galley door one morning, her stomach growling. The door remained sealed, the bioluminescent veins in the wall pulsing in angry red. "Open!" she commanded, tapping the control node. The ship didn't budge. "She won't open it until you say it," Graves called from the cockpit. "Say what?" Victoria snapped. "That I'm hungry?" "That you're afraid we're going to die in the next sector," Graves replied. "The ship senses the cortisol spike. She thinks you're repressing it, and she's decided that repressed captains don't get snacks." Victoria glared at the ceiling. "I'm not afraid of death. I'm the heir to—" The lights dimmed further. The door seemed to solidify. Victoria sighed, leaning her forehead against the cool bulkhead. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'm terrified that we're chasing a ghost story and that I've dragged you into a grave." The ship let out a satisfied purr. The red veins shifted to welcoming blue, and the door slid open. "Deception was armor once," Graves said when she brought him a ration bar in the cockpit. "In the palace, it kept you safe, kept you pristine. But out here, it's just weight. If you carry too many fabrications, you sink." Their destination was the Carter Archives, a derelict data satellite orbiting a brown dwarf star in what used to be the Colorado sector before the purification wars had rendered Earth's geography meaningless. The satellite looked like a silver needle floating in crushing darkness, surrounded by a cloud of sensor mines and automated defense turrets. "Stealth mode engaged," Sci-Fi announced. "I'm a leaf on the wind. Also, I'm hacking their security protocols. We're invisible." "Get us to the maintenance airlock," Victoria ordered, "and keep the chatter to a minimum." They breached the airlock in silence, moving through sterile white corridors while Sci-Fi disabled security grids with disturbing efficiency. The central vault was a massive circular room, its walls lined with crystalline data shards that glowed with the preserved memories of an empire. In the center stood a pedestal bathed in cold light. "Jack me in," Sci-Fi said. Victoria plugged the drone into the console. "Search for the Bloodline edicts. Founding era, year 0. A hologram materialized above the pedestal, a projection of the first president, Victoria's ancestor. He was speaking to a council of hooded figures. "The treaty is signed," the hologram spoke, its voice tinny with age. "The Dusk Crown is sealed. To ensure peace, we shall rewrite the law. The key shall be broken." "There," Graves pointed. "He admits it. He rewrote the law." "Wait," Victoria said, stepping closer. "Look at the schematic he's holding." The hologram displayed a diagram of the genetic lock that sealed the Crown technology. It was a double helix, 2 strands of DNA winding around each other to form a flawless circuit. "One strand is the Dusk blood," Graves said, tracing the golden line in the air. "That's me." "And the other strand," Victoria whispered, her blood running cold. "Look at the marker sequence. Alpha Prime Royal Bloodline." She looked at her own hand, then back at the hologram. The second strand wasn't generic. It was specific. It was the presidential bloodline. "The lock requires 2 signatures," she said, her voice trembling. "One from the Dusk Keepers and one from the ruling line. They didn't just hunt your people, Graves. They bound us together. The system requires both bloodlines to activate." The realization hit the room like a physical blow. "I'm the lock," Victoria breathed. "And you're the key," Graves said, staring at the schematic. "Our meeting," he continued slowly, "the way I was drawn to the Capitol, the way the artifacts responded when we were together in your study, it wasn't chance. It was engineering. My ancestors designed this," Victoria said, nausea rising. They created a biological failsafe that would force our two bloodlines to find each other if the system ever needed to be reset. And us? Graves asked, his voice hardening. What we feel, the connection, the chemistry, is that authentic, Victoria? Or is it just pheromonal coding designed to make sure the key fits the lock? Don't say that, Victoria warned, stepping back. Why not? Graves demanded. Sarah said I was built. Now we find out you were bred for the same purpose. We're not people. We're components in a machine. I'm not a component, Victoria shouted. Did you choose to save me? Graves countered, his eyes flashing with cold, desperate anger. Or did your genetic imperative override your logic? Maybe you saved me because your biology knows I'm the only way to turn on the machine. The accusation hung in the air, cruel and precise. Victoria looked at him, and for the first time since they'd fled New Columbia, she felt a chasm open between them that no amount of trust could bridge. Grab the data, she said coldly, her voice devoid of emotion. We're leaving. They retreated to the ship in silence. 3 hours out from the archive, they flew into the edge of the Roosevelt Nebula, a cloud of ionized gas that interacted with neural pathways, amplifying memory and trauma into hallucination. A bolt of violet energy struck the hull. The cockpit vanished. Victoria was suddenly 6 years old, kneeling on marble. Her father stood over her, crushing her wooden rabbit in his fist. Smile, he commanded. A queen smiles while others beg. The scene shifted. Now she was Graves, 12 years old, running through a forest of metal trees. Soldiers' boots thundered behind. Find the boy! Secure the asset! She felt his terror, not the fear of death, but the fear of erasure. I'm no one, young Graves whispered, curled in a drainage pipe. I'm dust. They snapped back to the cockpit. The ship was shaking violently. Graves was slumped over the controls, hyperventilating, eyes wide and unseeing. I'm no one, he mumbled. I'm dust. Victoria unbuckled and stumbled across the shaking deck. She grabbed his shoulders. Graves, she yelled. Look at me. He flinched, trying to pull away. You're not dust, she shouted. She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. You're Graves. You're the man who likes terrible synthetic coffee. You're the man who cracks jokes at executions. You're mine. The words cut through the storm. Graves blinked, his eyes focusing on hers. He saw the terror in her face, but also the fierce, unyielding determination. Victoria, he gasped. I'm here, she said, her voice breaking. I saw it. I saw them hunting you. I saw him, Graves whispered. Your father. I saw what he did to you. The ship lurched, but the bond held. They had seen the raw, bleeding roots of each other's trauma. Hold on to me, Victoria commanded gently. She took his hand and placed it on her chest, right over her heart. She took her own hand and placed it on his. Breathe, she said. In, out. They breathed together, synchronizing their rhythms, grounding each other in the physical reality of the moment. The memory storm raged outside, but inside the cockpit there was calm. We're not our programming, Graves said, his voice gaining strength. The president trained you to be cold. The engineers built me to be a key, but they didn't build this. He squeezed her hand. This is us, he said. This is a glitch in their design. And I'm grateful for every broken line of code that brought us together. The storm passed. They sat there for a long time, hands linked, afraid to let go. We need rules, Victoria said finally, if we're going to finish this. Rules are good, Graves agreed. We don't use this, she gestured between them, as an escape. We don't touch just to stop being afraid. When we're together, it has to be deliberate. It has to be because we want it, not because we need a shield. Agreed, Graves said. He looked at her with new respect. No more hiding, even from each other. The ruins of the dust crown lay at the center of a silent system, wrapped around a star that had been artificially dimmed to a low, sullen red. It was a ring structure, but fractured, the massive megastructure broken into 3 concentric arcs floating in a sea of debris. As they approached, a beam of pure white light hit the obsidian orchid, passing through the shields to scan the hull and crew. A voice resonated through the ship, not spoken but felt, translating directly in their minds. State your intent. They judge intention, Graves said, not purity, not blood. Intention. Victoria spoke into the comms, her voice steady. I'm Victoria Catherine Sterling of the United Purification States. I come to open the records and broadcast the truth. The cockpit simulation changed. Victoria stood on a floating platform. Before her was a control console. To her left, a projection of 1,000 UPS citizens trapped in a burning tower. To her right, a button that would save her own life, but abandon them. Choose, the Sentinel demanded. Save the many or save the self. Victoria stepped forward and smashed the console. I will not choose, she declared. I won't sacrifice them to save myself. And I won't sacrifice myself if it means leaving them to a tyrant. I'll find a third way. I'll save them all or die trying. The simulation shattered. Intent verified, protector. Now it was Graves's turn. He stood in a white void. A door appeared, leading to a peaceful world where no one would know his name. The prize is freedom, the Sentinel whispered. Betray the air. Walk away and be free. Graves looked at the door, everything he'd ever wanted. He turned his back on it. She's not a war, he said. She's the truth. I stay with her. Intent verified, partner. The massive docking clamps of the central ring opened, clearing a path. They were cleared for approach. As they drifted toward the heart of the ruins, a transmission came through on a frequency Victoria recognized. A lullaby her mother used to hum. Underneath the melody was a voice. Victoria, my brave girl, if you're hearing this, you've reached the crown. The president knows. He knows you're the lock. He's rigged the ruins with a quantum destabilizer. If you activate the throne, he'll collapse the star. He has hostages, millions of people in the lower districts. He's betting you're too soft to pull the trigger. The message ended with the lullaby humming one last time. Don't come back for me. Save the future. I love you. Silence filled the cockpit. He has hostages, Graves said quietly. Millions of people standing between us and the truth. Victoria stood, her face setting into terrible resolve. He thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'll hesitate. She looked at Graves. We're going in. We're going to the throne. Well, the obsidian orchid glided into the heart of the ruins, into a cavernous chamber lit by the dying red star. In the center sat the throne engine, a massive circular interface of clear crystal and living metal, pulsing with soft, inviting light. Victoria and Graves stood on the central dais, bathed in holographic history swirling around them. The displays didn't show conquest. They showed handshakes, councils where species of all forms sat in circles, debating trade routes and art. It was a peace treaty, Graves whispered, watching a phantom human and alien exchange data. Never about blood, about balance. My family turned a handshake into chains, Victoria said, her voice hollow. They erased the peace so they could sell us protection. The obsidian orchid shuddered violently beneath their feet. Captain, Cypher's voice echoed, the ship is detecting something cold. Emotional zero, absolute lack of empathy. It's a signature she recognizes. Victoria's blood drained. My father. The massive blast doors at the far end of the chamber groaned. Sparks of laser-cutting fire erupted along the seams. The metal imploded, smoke billowing. Through the haze, a heavy assault transport emerged, flanked by a dozen Royal Guard shock troopers in pristine white armor. And walking between them, unhurried, elegant, and terrifying, was President Richard Sterling. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a statue carved from ice, wearing the high-collared robes of state. Above him, the massive holographic face of the High Tribunal flickered into existence, filling the upper cavern. The sentence has been amended, the Tribunal's synthesized voice boomed. The execution of the blood thief Daniel Graves shall be broadcast to the 12 sectors as a warning. President Sterling stopped 10 meters from the dais. He looked at his daughter with disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. You're ill, Victoria, the president said softly. His voice carried flawlessly in the chamber's acoustics. You've been infected by the chaos of the lower species, but we can fix you. We'll scrub the memories of the last 2 months, reset your neural pathways. You'll be compliant again, pristine again. I'm not broken, Victoria said, stepping in front of Graves. I'm finally awake. Negotiation is over, the president said coldly. He gestured to the troopers. They raised their rifles, targeting lasers painting red dots on Graves's chest. A holographic map materialized beside the president, showing settlements on Ganymede. We have a fleet in position, the president said. We have identified the rebel cells that assisted you. 3 million souls. Surrender the blood thief, Victoria, or I burn them all. Be a hero to one mongrel or a savior to millions. Choose. The silence stretched, agonizing. Graves looked at the map, at the red dots on his chest, then at Victoria. He means it, Graves said softly. He'll kill them. He's bluffing, Victoria said, though she knew he wasn't. He never bluffs, Graves said. My life isn't worth 3 million people. He stepped away from her. Victoria grabbed his arm. No, don't do this. If I surrender, he lets the moon go, Graves said, his voice steady but his eyes terrified. You get to live. You get to be fixed. But you'll be alive. I'll be a hollow shell, Victoria shouted, and the galaxy will still be in chains. Surrendering doesn't save them, Graves. Just delays their execution until they become inconvenient again. She turned to face her father, fear pounding in her chest. But the anger was stronger. The clarity was absolute. I choose the third path, Victoria declared. There is no third path, the president said, bored. There's the truth, Victoria said. I'm turning on this machine, Father, and I'm letting it tell the galaxy exactly what you are. She grabbed Graves' hand and pulled him toward the throne engine. Kill them, the president ordered. The shock troopers opened fire. Cipher! Gravity! Victoria screamed. The AI shrieked a binary command, inverting local physics. The gravity in the chamber flipped 90 degrees. The floor became a wall. Troopers fell sideways, tumbling into statuary, their shots scorching the ceiling. Biomechanical sentinels dormant in the walls woke. Tall fluid shapes of chrome and light. One caught a rocket mid-flight. Aggression detected, the sentinel boomed. Intent, malice, access denied. It crushed the rocket and backhanded the trooper across the room. They're defending the peace, Victoria yelled. Keep moving. They fought through the chaos, reaching a floating bridge to the activation console. Behind a pillar, breathing hard, Victoria had a cut bleeding into her eye. Graves's tunic was scorched. No more running, Graves said, gripping her hand. No more half-truths, Victoria finished. If we die as us. On 3, Graves said. 1, 2, 3. They broke cover, sprinting across the bridge. A trooper landed in their path with a vibroblade. Victoria slid under his guard, sweeping his legs while Graves fired a stun bolt into his chest. They moved as a single unit, reaching the console, a pool of liquid light swirling with nebula colors. Touch it, Graves yelled. Both of us! They raised their hands. Stop! The president's voice roared. He was there, using gravity boots to walk up the pillar. He stood on the platform edge, face twisted in hatred, holding a ceremonial dagger of jagged obsidian. He lunged, not at Victoria, at the key. The blade plunged into Graves's side, just below the ribs. Not killing, but calculated. The president ripped it out, slick with bright red blood. Filth, the president spat. He swung the bloody knife and struck the console, smearing Graves's blood across the pristine interface. The system requires purity of intent, the president screamed, composure shattering. It requires noble blood. Let it taste the fear of a mongrel. The console shrieked. The blue light turned sickly, violent purple. The machine convulsed, reading the blood as corruption. The pain, trauma, violence poisoning the handshake. Graves fell to his knees, clutching his side. Victoria. Victoria caught him, looking at the blood, then at her father. White-hot rage exploded in her chest. The rage of a lifetime of silence, of being told to smile, of being called pristine while watching cruelty called order. She snatched the blaster from Graves's belt, leveling it at her father's chest. The president laughed. Go ahead. Show me you're my daughter. Kill me and you become the regent. You become the thing you hate. Victoria's finger tightened on the trigger. She wanted to do it. It would be justice. She looked at Graves. He was pale, shaking, but looking at her eyes, not the gun. Mercy is not weakness, he'd told her once. Mercy is control. If she pulled the trigger, she validated his worldview. She proved violence was the only solution. Victoria lowered the gun. No, she said. Her voice was quiet but cut through the noise. I'm not your daughter. Not anymore. She holstered the weapon and knelt beside Graves. The machine is confused, she said, pressing her hands over his on the wound. It tastes the pain. We have to give it something else. Overwhelm it with the whole truth. She grabbed his bloody hand and slammed it onto the console alongside her own. Speak, she commanded. I'm Graves, he yelled, voice cracking. I'm a fabricator. I was built to be a tool. I'm terrified of dying. I lied to survive. The purple light flickered. I'm Victoria, she shouted. I'm the coward who hid in a glass tower. I hated my family. I wanted to burn it all down. The machine hummed, dissonant smoothing. It was listening, hearing raw humanity beneath genetic markers. I love him, Victoria screamed, tears streaming. I love him, and it scares me to death. That's the truth. I choose her, Graves gasped, head falling onto her shoulder. I choose her over freedom. I choose the pain if it means I'm genuine. The console flashed white gold, blindingly bright. The system didn't reject the pain. It accepted it. The fear, love, regret as necessary components of living alliance. It recognized cooperation wasn't about two pristine things fitting together, but about two broken things holding on. Identity verified, intent, honest, broadcasting. The roof dissolved into a beam of pure data, shooting upward, punching through rock, interference, the president's blockade. It hit relay satellites, multiplying across the empire. Screens flickered in grand plazas, victory banners replaced by holographic history of the peace treaty. In mining colonies, slave collars deactivated. In fleet cockpits, pilots watched footage of the president stabbing a wounded man, heard audio of his madness, saw proof of the fabrication they'd served. The propaganda didn't crack. It evaporated. In the core, the president stared at the beam, watching his empire crumble on tactical displays. Mutiny codes flashed. The fleet stood down. He looked at Victoria, holding Graves, weeping with relief. You've ruined it, the president whispered. You've let chaos in. He reached into his robes, pulling out a small flat device. The fail-safe. If I cannot order the galaxy, then I'll cleanse it. Father, no, Victoria shouted. He pressed the button. A siren wailed, felt in the marrow. The red star outside flared. Gravity anchors disengaged. Royal Purge Protocol initiated, the computer announced calmly. Total structural collapse in T-minus 60 seconds. Thank you for your service. The floor buckled, walls folded inward. Run, Graves wheezed, trying to stand. Victoria grabbed him, hauling him up, wrapping his arm around her neck. We're both leaving. The ship, Sci-Fi screamed. Orchid is coming through the wall. The black nose of the living ship smashed through the chamber side, vines flailing, ramp extending. Victoria dragged Graves toward it. She didn't look back at her father. The president stood alone on the dais, watching the light, waiting for the end of the world he'd built. They scrambled up the ramp as the ceiling fell. Soldiers Victoria had saved earlier rushed forward, lifting Graves, carrying him. Victoria was last on the bridge. She stopped at the airlock, looked back. The president and tribunal stood on the platform, not running, watching the new era leave them behind. The light swallowed them. Victoria jumped into the airlock. Punch it! The obsidian orchid screamed defiance. Biodrives flared, pushing past light speed as the ruins collapsed into singularity. Silence followed, heavy and profound. 3 days later, the orchid drifted in quiet orbit at a nebula's edge. Victoria sat on the observation deck in a simple tunic, armor packed, holding untouched tea. The door hissed. Graves entered, slow, favoring his left side, clutching a cane Sci-Fi had made. Chest wrapped in bandages, but upright, alive. You look terrible, Victoria said without turning. You look beautiful, Graves replied, limping to sit beside her. And also terrible. Have you slept? No, I keep waiting for alarms. There are no alarms, Graves said. Empires in chaos. Governors too busy arguing over new history to hunt us. We're yesterday's news. We're not news, Victoria said. We're symbols. She gestured at her data pad. The new sigil spray-painted everywhere. 2 lines entwined, breaking a circle. They don't know what to call me. I'm not princess, not commoner, just the one who broke the machine. You're Victoria, Graves said, taking her hand. That's enough. The ship's console chimed. Not a threat, A message from the Dusk Crown. A holographic waveform appeared. Complex, ancient, deep. "What's that?" Victoria asked. "A handshake," Graves said, reading data, eyes widening. "Victoria, when we activated the crown, we didn't just broadcast to the Empire. Who did we broadcast to?" "Everyone," Graves whispered. "The signal went to deep space, past the rim, past known charts." The waveform resolved into a star map. New stars flared on the horizon, systems dark for 1,000 years. From the darkness between galaxies, a response pinged back. "Something hurt us," Graves said, terror and exhilaration mixing. "Something ancient." They noticed the lock opening. Victoria looked at the vast, terrifying, beautiful dark. The story wasn't over. Happily Ever After wasn't a garden party. It was a universe getting bigger, stranger, more dangerous. But looking at the new stars, she didn't feel the old fear. She felt the warmth of Graves's hand, the steady hum of the ship that loved them, the weight of the truth she'd chosen. "Let them come," Victoria said softly, leaning her head on Graves's shoulder. "We have a ship, we have the truth, and I'm done running." Graves kissed the top of her head. "So?" He looked at the unknown vector on the map. "Where to?" Victoria smiled, not a royal mask, but a smile that belonged only to her. "There's a planet in Sector 7 sending a distress signal. They need help building a new government, a genuine one this time, with representation, with diversity, with all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with freedom." Graves smiled. "A mission. I like it." They held hands as the ship turned toward the signal. They were no longer running. They were building.